Welcome back. This is the Marketer of the Day podcast. Mr. Matthew Pollard is here from MatthewPollard.net, and you can see his books behind him called The Introvert's Edge. Now, Matthew is responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar business success stories, and he's the founder of IntrovertU.com, and he's the best-selling author of the Introvert's Edge book series, which has sold over 100,000 copies. And we're going to be talking about this whole concept of being introverted, how to make it work for you, how it can work for your business. So, Matthew, glad to be speaking with you.
Man, I'm ecstatic to be here. Thank you for having me.
And it goes both ways. I'm just as excited to have you, especially because sometimes it gets tiring talking about another interview about SEO or landing pages. But now we're going to dive deep and getting to the good stuff, the painful psyche of people. And this term, introvert, it gets thrown around a lot. And sometimes you wonder if someone says they're an introvert, well, do you really know if you are, or is that just an excuse? And then you hear about these things like, well, like extroverts, I guess, get their energy being around people and introverts get drained. But then we also realize that, well, maybe being an introvert can mean that you just apply different techniques. It doesn't mean that you just have to give up on entrepreneurism and business. So with all that mess, with all these things that I kind of threw at the wall for you, what are you all about? What is this introvert thing anyway? And what are we talking about?
You know, it's really interesting. I mean, you covered a lot there, and I mean, let's touch base on firstly the highlight of funnels versus all these other things that you can do when it comes to online marketing. I mean, the truth is, if you can't get on a phone call and close someone, a lot of that stuff is useless, right? So as for an introvert, they kind of feel like the cards are stacked against them when it comes to that. Now, of course, you can say, oh, well, I'm going to have a funnel that just, never actually speaks to someone at all, but I'm just going to do it all digitally. Okay, well, if you can't articulate the value of what you provide when somebody's politely listening to you in a networking room, well, it's a lot harder online when people give you fractions of a second. So it's so much more important. And people are, oh, but if I could just get them to sit with me for 2.5 minutes. Well, in the digital world, they're less likely to do that. And the truth is, these days people are actively looking for messages that they identify with. And for that, they'll pay a premium, but you have to learn how to articulate it, and not just in a networking room, online, and then in a sales conversation. Now, this is particularly important for introverts, but what I find is extroverts actually struggle a lot online as well, because they use so many words to try and explain their value. And online, that doesn't work really well either. But to go to the simple terms of what introversion is, and I think you're 100% right on this, people have made it way too confusing. And I like to just go down to, well, it is where you draw your energy from. It doesn't mean you can't sell, you can't network, you can't public speak. I mean, I'm an introvert, and hopefully people feel that I'm quite articulate and I'm an engaging, interview guest. But the fact is that when I'm finished with interviews like this, I'm just tired afterwards. That's it. And I think that you're 100% right. People do use introversion as an excuse, but it shouldn't be an excuse, because the fact of the matter is introverts aren't second-class citizens. Our path to success is just different to that of an extrovert. And let's face it, extroverts have their own burdens to bear. Some might say they're not the best listeners. Some might say they're not the most empathetic, which is real, especially if they're copywriters. If you can't empathize with your clients, wow, that's a real big problem. But the problem I see, especially from a corporate world, but even more specifically in small business, is an extrovert will say, okay, I'm not great at empathy. I can't listen that well. I'll go and do a course, or I'll read a book, and they'll learn it. Introverts just say, oh, I can't do that. I don't have that natural gift. And it's not true, but it is like we've created this artificial wall that we just can't seem to cross. And that's why I spend my life really helping introverts realize that getting better at their functional skills is not going to help. It's about learning the skills outside the scope of their functional skill that allow them to create a rapid growth business that revolves around them, their family, and their life, not the other way around.
Wonderful. This is amazing. There's so much to think about. Just this, I mean, there's a few ideas here, right? There's the idea of that there's your existing skills, and there's like using your own thinking to solve some problems. And like, sure, a lot of problems can be solved there, but many times we need to look outside and get new information and new tools and new reminders and things to stretch ourselves and to get new achievements and to get to these new goals that we haven't achieved before. And it seems like a lot of it comes down to empathy, right? Because we're trying to get that attention, make the sale in whatever context that is. And you think about, like you said, there's a limited time span and there's only so many things we can say. And there's someone out there who needs exactly what we have, but we need to use the right combination of words and the right kind of logical arguments. But then you can't necessarily just like feel them out, right? You can't say, hey, would you like me to talk about this? And would you like me to say that? You kind of have to be like reading their diary entry in advance. So that way, when they get your message, they say, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I need. So it's a little bit of a tough problem to solve. And I like how you said there, how there's introverts and there's extroverts, right? And extroverts say, well, maybe I need to beef up my skills. And introverts say, hey, I don't even want to try. So we need to get people past that barrier, right? We need to say, well, you should try. You owe it to yourself in the future and your business and the people you're helping to try. Get out of your own way. Stop the self-sabotage. And so why is this your focus? Like, did you, like you said, like you're an introvert, but did you really have to overcome, like, of all the angles, the hooks that your book series could have been, why the focus on the introvertism, if that's a word? Introversion.
I'm not sure. If it isn't, it should be, right? So
Yeah.
I think that, well, firstly, I didn't want to write the books. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I mean, one thing most people, well, I guess my backstory is I had a reading speed of a sixth grader in late high school. I mean, I was super introverted and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, like none. And luckily enough, I was diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome, which basically means I put on a funny pair of colored lenses, which definitely didn't help with my confidence, but miraculously I can learn to read. Now I couldn't start I couldn't read like everyone else in my grade, but I could start the process of learning to read. And so the last 2 years of high school for me, I mean, they were an absolute hustle, but I got into the top 20% of my state, but my family could see, like, I was just exhausted. Like I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was just beaten up. And so because of that, we all agreed, and maybe some of the people listening have kind of got kids that are doing this now, but we all agreed I was going to take a year off to find myself. And my dad broke his back 80 hours a week. I definitely wasn't going to be sitting on the couch watching Oprah. I was going to go and get a job. And so I took a job at a real estate agency. And before anyone thinks I was the person out selling, I wasn't. I was the guy in the back office doing data entry with a look on my face like, don't speak to me. I'm here to find myself. And the thing what was interesting though is about 3 weeks in, it was horrifying for me at the time, but it ended up being a blessing. My manager pulls me aside. He's like, I'm so sorry. We just got a phone call from head office. They're shutting down this premise. You're out of work. I worked there 3 weeks. This is Australia at Christmas time. Like, you can't get a job in Australia at Christmas time. Like, no one's hiring. We go on holidays on the 20th of December and we don't come back till the 15th or 20th of January. The only jobs that I found in the paper, because I was terrified of going home and telling my father that I was out of work, were commission-only sales roles. And I mean, there's a photo I put up in a lot of my on-stage presentations of me at my sister's wedding with this terrible acne. And I'm like, I didn't feel comfortable talking to people, period, let alone commission-only sales. But I applied for 3 jobs, which are the only 3 jobs in the paper. They were all commission-only. I got 3 interviews, and then I got 3 job offers. And I'm like, wow, maybe they see something in me I don't see in myself. Well, the trainer put that to bed. I took a job doing business-to-business telecommunications, door-to-door. And my trainer said, Matt, we just hire everyone. Like, we've got this saying, we just throw mud up against the wall, we see what sticks, which I guess is a fun saying until you realize you're the mud. So anyway, 5 days product training, not a single second of sales training. I get thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia. It's like 1,000 doors on each side. Just go sell, they told me. I didn't know what to say. So I walk into the first door and I say I was luckily politely told to leave, because shortly after that I was sworn at, then I was told to get a real job. That was always my personal favorite. Well, that happened until I got to my 93rd door where I made my first sale. And I made about $70 at that time, which was a lot of money for me back then. But then I realized I got to do this again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And the whole idea of that was not okay. And I think a lot of introverts are hearing me and going, oh, well, that's, you just grind it out or you give up, which is what, 19 people in my training group of 20 did. And what I decided is sales had to be a system. And I had a reading speed of a 6th grade. I'm not picking up a Brian Tracy or a Zig Ziglar book, but I typed in sales system in YouTube. And all these videos came up. And like every day I'd spend 8 hours applying what I learned. And then I'd spend 8 hours coming home and practicing the next step or perfecting the step I was working on. Weekends, I'd spend 16 hours practicing. I mean, I'm sure it's not sounding fun to anyone, but really quickly I got improvements. Like soon it was 48 doors, then 21 doors, then 18, then 7, then 3. About 6 weeks in, my manager pulled me aside and he's like, I actually thought I was going to get fired because he had this look on his face, same as my manager. And I have to tell you, I was the quiet guy that handed my paperwork in downstairs. Didn't talk to any of the boisterous sales reps upstairs. And he's like, Matt, we're kind of blown away by this, but we just got our national sales figures. You're the #1 salesperson at the company. This was the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. And then the most ridiculous thing happened. He's like, you can sell, you can manage. I don't know why people think that. Like, I was like, I have no idea. They gave me 20 people. They all quit within 24 hours. Back to YouTube, learned to manage, got pretty good at it. got promoted about 7 times in the space of about 12 months, and then started up my own business. Fast forward just shy of a decade, I'd been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar businesses. So I knew as an introvert we could succeed. It was only when I worked with a client that was a ghostwriter and we were able to explode his business that he was like, Matt, you've got to put this work into a book. And so we worked together. He was my ghostwriter. By the way, if he had told me how much work it was going to be to write this book, I may have reconsidered. Now I've done it twice and I've got the networking book as well. But for me, it's really become a mission because I believe that introverts make the best salespeople, the best networkers, the best business owners. They just don't believe they can. And because that's in their way, they don't try as often as they should.
I love it. There's again, there's so much to think about, right? Every kind of back and forth in our conversation, I'm like, there's like a mountain of like 5 or 6 blocks to look at and unpack. And it's always a good reminder when you look back and you trash talk yourself. You think about how bad you used to be. But if that's way in the past and you've come so far, then that is the ingredients for a great story. And I love your mindset here. It's almost like a sports training mindset, right? If you were looking to get good at basketball, of course you wouldn't be a natural and you might throw the basketball at the hoop and you might throw 100 and get 1. But then you keep at it and you go into YouTube University and you watch the videos and you put in the time and you put in the practice and you put in the adjustments, then you get it down to maybe I'll sink 1 every 50, 1 every 20. And it seemed like it was a similar mindset with you, just saying, well, I'll really dedicate the time and the focus to the learning and the training, and then go back and just make this my obsession, knowing that over time, the muscle will improve and I'll get the intuitiveness figured out. And then that in itself will then even lead to my stretching even further and even more problems, because you said, well, then it led to having to figure out the leadership and on and so forth. And so it's great to hear about just your mindset, your attitude here of saying, well, your disadvantage becomes an advantage by saying, well, I have this path, and the path is of the dedication, putting in the time and making it happen. And so where do people go wrong with this? Like, it's so easy for us to talk ourselves out of something or tell ourselves like, I'm tired or I have other priorities. So how the heck did you stay persistent and stay focused and stay on track when it's so easy for the negative self-talk to come back in or for all the other distractions of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. And I'm going to try and unpack this for you in a way that doesn't give you 7 more questions to ask afterwards. But I think that the biggest thing is the pain's got to be worth the gain, right? Like, a lot of people move into the entrepreneurship journey because maybe they listen to something that Gary Vee said and they're like, I'm just not successful unless I start my own business. I mean, that's not true. Like, if you want to be a writer, be a writer. If you want to be a coder, be a coder. I'm just saying, if you want to be a salesperson, be a salesperson. If you want to be an entrepreneur, be an entrepreneur, but know specifically why. I mean, while I've got a podcast called The Introvert's Edge, I've also got another podcast called Better Business Coach. And there's an episode called Forget About Goals, Why is the Key to Success? And I find any high achiever can just write goals. But then they quickly realize when they have to write the why part behind it in this exercise that I give you it's episode 17, they quickly realize they've inherited that goal from their mother, their father, I don't know, drunk roommate they had in college. They hear these things like, I want that, but they don't think it through. And for those that push through, they realize when they achieve success, they didn't want it. And it's actually a really humbling time. But a lot of people don't put in the work. So it's got to be worth the effort. The other thing is you have to have a mindset that explores the fact that there is always a solution, but you may not have it presented to you at that time. You have to have that inquisitiveness. One of the things I talk about from stage in one of my presentations all the time is I think it really came down, I say, so what can we learn from this? Well, the answer is that anything's a skill that can be learned and mastered. I think that's an important learning, but nowhere near as important as when people ask, well, what stopped me from just accepting the way it was going to be? Or more, and I think that the answer is simple. I took responsibility for it. Now, again, if the pain's not worth the gain, why would you do that? So you've got to take responsibility, but the pain's got to be worth the gain for that. The second is I lived in what if, like Henry Ford says, if you think you can, or if you think you can't, you're right. So you have to believe there's a solution, and then you got to be willing to do the work. Like, if you're not willing to do the work, then, I mean, you can sit there and try and, will it into existence from mindset all you want. It's not going to happen. So you have to be willing to do the work. And that was the thing that I always found. I was always willing to take responsibility, even if I could say, well, it's not my fault, I'm an introvert. I took responsibility. And I think that happened. And actually, when I came to the US, this is a really good example of this. When I came to the United States, so when I turned 30, I traveled the world for a year. And I mean, every good story's got a girl in it, right? I met my now wife, and I made the decision I was going to move to the US. And when I moved to the US, I decided that I didn't want to start any more like business. Like every business that I started, like I love that first part, the part where you create the messaging that excites and inspires. You find the niche and you build the sales system. And I realized that I just wanted to help other people do it. And I decided I wanted to help introverts. And I still remember I just moved, my wife and I had just moved into this apartment complex. And I met this guy out of the blue. And I hadn't really thought about how I was going to articulate my value yet. And he's like, for 20 minutes, he told me about this gym he owned and how much he loved it. And then he asked me what I did. And I remember, I still regret it. I said, I'm a sales trainer. And he looked at me like I was one step above a scam artist. Like you could tell he had a bad experience in the past with a previous sales coach or whatever. And he started to explain all the things of why he hates my industry. And I found myself defending myself. Like I wasn't trying to get a client. I was just trying to make a friend. And I just went, I'm never doing that again. Now, later on, I went and I decided that I was going to call myself a marketer. And so I went networking and people asked me what I did. And I said, oh, I'm in marketing. And people went, oh, I'm in marketing. How much does that cost? And I'm like, we're talking about price. I just met you. And then like other times they'd say, oh, I've already got someone in marketing. What am I supposed to say? Oh, I've got magic ruby slippers. I'm different. I think a lot of email copy and a lot of web copy are written the same way. And I just hate that. But when I went online, I went back to YouTube and I was like, there's got to be a solution. I took responsibility for finding a solution. I said, what if? And then I went to YouTube and the best I could find was this thing called an elevator pitch. I do this for this group of people, even if, which basically sounds to me, it sounds so contrived. It's like, Robert, I want to work with you because, I'm trying to buy a new car and I really want to buy a new car. Give me your money. I hate that. And I was like, there's got to be something more passion rich. And what I realized is, for that to work, you have to stop identifying as your functional skill because every individual is so much more than that. Like, for me, I'm a business coach, I'm a branding expert, I'm a social media strategist, I'm a sales expert. I'm too many things. Nobody cares. And that's what I realized. But I needed a way of framing it. And what I decided, actually created this thing. So even though it didn't exist, I took responsibility. And even though YouTube said to me, there's nothing here except for this contrived elevator pitch, I didn't say, well, I'm comfortable with that because every introvert, every extrovert needs to find what's comfortable to them. And it just didn't feel comfortable. So I created this concept called what I call a unified message. So I decided that I would call myself the rapid growth guy and I would explain it very similar to like if somebody asked me what I did, and I always be interested before I try to be interesting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Matt, I've been talking to you for 20 minutes. I haven't even asked you what it is that you do. I say, oh, thanks for asking. I'm the rapid growth guy. Full stop. Like I just said, I'm an accountant. And it's funny, you watch their brains explode because they're trying to put you in a box and they can't. And they feel that you've spent 20 minutes being interested in them. They have no idea, where to take this and they want to be interested. So they say, what exactly is that? And I then learned to communicate with passion and mission, not function. No I statements. So for the people listening at home, what I structure it is I love to see this. I hate to see this, which is why I'm on a mission to do this. Explanation. Like, thanks for asking. Well, one of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service-based business owner with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to go and start a business of their own. But what I find, and I just hate seeing this, is they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel, struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, really feeling like people only care about one thing, price. Do you know anyone like that? Well, if you've learned to do your research before you go, they're like that. Networking should feel like a bunch of pre-planned meetings. And then when they respond in the affirmative, I just say, well, I'm on a mission to help introverts like yourself realize that you really can have a rapid growth business doing what you love, just not by getting better at your functional skill. Instead, just 3 things outside the scope of that allow you to build a business that revolves around you, your family, and your life, not the other way around. Actually, let me give you an example, and then I might tell a story. The difference is it's compelling. People are aligned with, oh my gosh, this is passion. Like, I've never heard this in a networking room. And then what I realized is because I was so able to articulate that face-to-face, I was able to build a global brand, leveraging a lot of automation that just doesn't work in the world for those people that are just trying to take a photo of their dog or their donut for something to say because they're the loudest rather than the clearest. I decided to be the clearest, not the loudest. So to come back to your statement, my willingness to say, I take responsibility, I live in what if, even if there's no theory out in the world, I created something that felt authentic. And then I was willing to do the work, allowed me to create a totally new concept. And now that's what I share in my new book, The Introvert's Edge to Networking, that exact formula on how to create a unified message. And this has, changed the lives of tens of thousands of people. So for anyone that's listening, if it doesn't exist, create it for yourself. Just live in what if and have a willingness to do the work. And more importantly, take responsibility. If you've got a problem, it's your problem. It's not somebody else's.
This is amazing. This is powerful. We pack so much into our conversation here, right? And you just think about some of these issues of, well, am I setting my goals, or am I setting my goals right, or am I sticking with it? And you're saying that a real hidden danger is having goals that are someone else's, that were given to you, or it sounded good, or you were a chameleon, or you had some friend, then you were jealous of what they had, so you decided to try to inhabit their skin. And it's a nuanced situation, and it's a lot to navigate. And I love this idea of the unified message, the spin on the elevator pitch, because I think the elevator pitch idea, it is on the right track, right? With the things we talk about, the short attention span, everything's 60 seconds these days with the TikToks. And when you use the chat GPT, you say, hey, well, I want to get this narrowed in and refined to super small. But then when you just say, well, I help this type of person, it's like, it feels like there should be more. But your idea here of saying, I love this and I hate this, and then I'm on a mission of passion to do that, that adds the depth and the character, right? It excludes a group, it adds a conflict, it adds an enemy. It's like kind of that cool micro story. And it's a nice tool in the toolbox for us to, as you say, to be concise, but also stand out, and also stand for something, and also not just be this job title, not just be this commodity, and for you to quickly explain what you do, but also it kind of sparks off a conversation. So there's so many cool things for us to think about as far as you and your journey and your insights and what you've built. And since this is this age of micro content, this is a podcast, we're just here to give them a tease, a taste. And we want to say, man, this guy, Matthew, he's really figured out some things. And if he gave me some of these solutions just in his first few minutes, imagine what's in his book. Imagine what's on his website and his training and his courses. So if someone says, well, I was really excited and amazed and energized by what Matthew had to say today, then what's the logical next step? How does someone find out about your book, your website, and you as a person?
Absolutely. And I appreciate you asking that. Well, firstly, for those people that want to create their own version of the rapid growth guy, and, there's some amazing unified messages like the authority architect, the narrative strategist, the China success coach. There are so many great names that I see people come out with, but by using the template that you can get access to at matthewpollard.com/growth. And if you go there, there'll be what I always recommend is get somebody to listen to this podcast first and do it with them. But if you're a florist, don't do it with another florist. If you're a business coach, don't do it with another business coach, because you'll get stuck in your functional skill, right? So get them to listen to it and then spend about an hour and a half on them and vice versa. I did this at the National Freelance Conference, and literally at the end of the session, I said, put your hand up if you now believe you've got a unified message that will excite and inspire. And in theory, if we had more time, I would talk about this, but you should identify a niche of wanting and willing to buy clients that will respond to it. And about 97% of the room put their hands up. And then I said, look, do me a favor, keep your hands up if this is the most time you spend actively working on your marketing, not reading books, but actively working on your marketing since you started your business. 85% of the room kept their hands up. The whole session was 90 minutes long, right? So if you spend 90 minutes on them and they spend 90 minutes on you, you don't need to hire me. That'll get you to the outcome. Now, if you want to learn how to sell, and if you're an introvert, believe to sell, you don't need to buy my book for this. My publisher hates me when I say this. Just go to the introvertsedge.com. You can download the first chapter. There, I will give you overwhelming evidence for why, as an introvert, you have the edge when it comes to selling. And I will literally map out the full 7 steps of the sales process. If you do nothing more than throw what you currently say into that, you'll realize, firstly, there's some things out of order. Fix that. There's some things that don't fit. Throw that out. You shouldn't be saying that to customers. That's all the jargon and the things they don't want to hear. And then you'll realize there's some gaping holes. And if you fill those, there's no way you won't double your sales in the next 60 days. Now, of course, if you pick up the book, there's a full video implementation training in the back of the networking book and in the back of the sales book. But if you just want to believe you can and get a solid process to double your sales, the first chapter will do that for you.
Fantastic. And I'm really seeing the value here in the self-examination, and many people don't do it, or maybe they did it 5 years ago, and it might be a little awkward and painful to take a good look at first, but that's how we get to growth. And that's how we get to that next stage by looking at, well, what am I even saying and not realizing it? And even more importantly, what am I saying that's bad? What am I saying that is hurting my message? What am I saying that's subtracting that we can kind of maybe cut down? And as we've been saying many times in our conversation here, Matthew, it's hard to figure it out on your own, right? It's hard to overcome your own thinking. There's that saying of like, maybe you're smart enough to know that you're awkward, but not smart enough to overcome your own awkwardness. And that's why we need help from people like you by going to matthewpollard.net/growth. And then the other URL was theintrovertsedge.com. Is that right?
That's correct. And it's actually matthewpollard.com as well. But
Okay.
yeah, all the links are available. Well, if you just type in Matthew Pollard online, I take up the first page. You'll find me real easily.
Fantastic. Well, you practice what you preach, right? You're all about the recurring repetition and making sure that what you say out there has value and that you're not just putting out the message once. You're going to the networking, you're doing the speaking gigs, you're putting out multiple books, you're doing the podcast appearances, you're doing all these things to get attention, even though in the moment it feels weird that you have to like send 100 emails or knock on 50 doors, but you have to put out so much effort just so that way someone sees the little blip from you, right? They see the little LinkedIn post, the YouTube. They don't see that you put out 100 other YouTube videos or 1,000 other LinkedIn posts, and we have to do way more than we thought we did. And then you mentioned that a couple of times too, of just that if you saw the work ahead of you, you probably wouldn't do it, right? If you knew how many doors you had to knock on, how many hours on YouTube to figure things out, if you knew all that, you probably would have been discouraged, but it just take all that effort and work and time to get to where you need to go. And so as people go to these places, matthewpollard.com or just Google it, and theintrovertsedge.com, do you have any final soundbite talking point? Because we love quotes, we love sound bites. So to end with a bang instead of a whimper, do you have a final, lasting, powerful quote or lesson to excite us and send us on our way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the best one I can give you is there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. Like so many people will say, "Oh, I'm a recovering introvert," or "I was an introvert, but don't worry, I'm not anymore." You can't change who you are, and there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. As a matter of fact, if you think about Oprah Winfrey, you think you can't do small talk? Oprah Winfrey, David Letterman, they're both introverts. If you think you can't network, Ivan Misner, the founder of BNI, the world's largest networking group in the world, is an introvert. Everywhere you go, the rock stars at the top of every industry, there are a lot of introverts, and you can be one too. So stop thinking there's something wrong with you. Do the work, and you'll be blown away at what you can achieve.
I love it. Amazing and inspiring. You're in the club and use that to your advantage and get you where you want to go. Matthew Pollard, wonderful speaking with you.
It was my honor, mate. Thanks for having me on.